Hello, everyone. My name is Richmond Kinney, and I am with the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. I'm happy to be here with you all tonight after a couple years. Welcome back to the Fireside Reading Series. I did not even live in the city. It's the last time there was one, but it is very nice to be here tonight. So the Fireside Reading Series is the Friends' longest running program. It's celebrating its 29th year in partnership with the Hamline Midway Library. And it's made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and our neighbors down Snelling, Minnesota United. Coffee and cider have been kindly provided by Ginkgo Coffee House, and we are so grateful for your support and your presence here this evening. We'll begin with a reading and then open things up to questions from you. We're also doing it hybrid. We have a webinar happening at the same time on Zoom. So we'll also be taking questions from our online audience, and we'll be selling some books afterwards at that little table behind you. So feel free to hang around and get it signed after the reading. So to kick off the series this year in its 29th year, I'm very excited to introduce you to Maren Cooper. Maren is a St. Paul resident. She currently serves as a volunteer for various nonprofits and retreats frequently to the shore of Lake Superior, where she loves to hike and watch the deer devour her hostas. Deer and rabbits and squirrels. And Finding Grace is her second novel. Maren, it's all yours.
Very good. Thank you for that kind introduction, Richmond. And thank you so much for having me, and Happy New Year. This is actually my first hybrid Zoom live event. Finding Grace came out in July, and I had a wonderful live audience down at Open Book for my launch. And I've done several bookstore events. I've done some libraries already. I've even done a Instagram live, which they had to teach me how to do that. And so I've been getting around. I had a little bit of a hiatus over the holidays. So Happy New Year is a sentiment that we're out and about now. So Zoom is custom built for Minnesota winters, I think, right? It's kind of nice. And this winter, of course, is a doozy. I understand we're getting some interesting weather coming in tonight, but it's very nice of you guys to realize you could probably still be out for the early evening. So thanks for being here. And I've got my penguin walk down now, you know, enough snow, try to stay safe. And I've got some studded boots, so I know how to walk on the ice. So I'm a native Minnesotan. And so I think I know how to do it. I think I can get home safe. So I hope we can together avoid some Zoom fatigue here. And while I'm talking and while I read, I would like to have you all think of questions for me, because these kinds of events are really made for that kind of discussion. So, and this book is somewhat provocative, and I think there will be some questions that you might have of me. So as I was preparing for today, I looked back to refresh my memory of how it came about. And Wendy Worden has been especially helpful in sharing information about how to approach libraries. And I'm so grateful to her and the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library for continuing to sponsor and foster the Fireside Reading Series. 29 years and counting, that's just kind of amazing. So I'm very happy to open it this year. So thanks to all involved, and especially to the Hamline Library for hosting the events. Thank you. All right, so I am going to start talking a little bit about the book. And what can I say about the book to those of you who haven't read it? I would guess many of you have, and I won't guarantee that I'll stay away from spoilers, especially when we get to the Q&A, because I think that's why people want to ask certain questions of me. And I promise I will, tell you what I think. But it's a family saga. It's one family story over a generation or so. There are 3 point of view characters, but the main narrator is Charlie. The book is categorized as contemporary fiction, sometimes women's fiction or domestic fiction, small town fiction, a coming of age story, commercial fiction, and it can be a tough read. It's an emotional story. Some have described it as gut-wrenching, heart-rending, but they've also described it as beautiful and a tribute to unconditional love. So my advice, don't stop in the middle. You'll be rewarded if you get to the ending. So I want to start with the hook of the story, and there's no spoilers here, as this is frequently how the book is described, and it's actually on the cover itself. Charlie and Caroline meet in college biology lab and drift into a relationship of his design. Mesmerized by her drive, Charlie sees in Caroline, an orphan like himself, a partner who will help him face the world. Charlie couldn't be more wrong. He wants a home, family, roots. But Caroline, a gifted ornithologist, plans a life of travel and adventure, following her heart's desire and her birds, wherever they may take her. And she expects Charlie to tag along. When Caroline gets pregnant against her wishes, Charlie assumes she will change her mind. She doesn't. Their daughter Grace falls through the devastating schism that grows between her parents. When Grace finally runs away, everything becomes a bargaining chip in a very high-stakes game. So Caroline is a very bold, unapologetic character. She follows her own nature and holds Charlie to his promise to parent their daughter without her help, an arrangement that allows her to travel the world and follow these birds wherever they may take her. But it's an uneasy truce that results in near tragedy for their daughter Grace, who comes of age in a household full of toxic resentment on one side and suffocating love on the other. Grace increasingly struggles with her mental health as she grows older. The story is told by all three of them and is set against the backdrop of Lake Superior on the North Shore. Finding Grace is that chronicle then of the struggles and eventual insight gained by each over the years, starting with Charles and Caroline's courtship and continuing into Grace's early adulthood. So it's a poignant coming of age journey for both Grace and her parents. So the reading I like to do is actually the first chapter. And it takes place right after the prologue, but is helpful in setting up the story. Chapter 1, Kearney, Nebraska, spring 1996. Not the most romantic place to propose, but Charles Booker knew it fit Caroline perfectly. A rugged bird blind in Nebraska just before dark. It was an amazing sight. The sandhill cranes swooped in with their long necks cutting through the sky, their bodies aligned, following as sharp as knives against the backdrop of the twilight sky. Shh, I need to block everything out for this moment. Caroline shushed him as he crouched down beside her, his feet scattering the gathered leaves on the concrete floor of the blind. He thought, not for the first time, how most men would feel diminished if the woman in their life had a passion so obviously beyond them. But Charlie was awed by Caroline and her brilliant mind. He was just grateful to be in her galaxy and let the energy around her envelop him. They had waited for hours, and this moment wouldn't last long. At twilight, the noisy, raucous sandhill cranes landed by the hundreds, squeezing in without disturbing their colleagues who had already landed. As the night turned completely dark, the birds' loud cries continued unabated while the final stragglers found their nights home. Charlie hoped the afterglow of this wonder would serve to keep Caroline in a state of euphoria long enough for him to get the words out before she reverted to the scientist focused on her next challenge. And who knew if that would include him? Caroline finally put the binoculars down and lowered her body onto the bench. With her raven black curls tightly pulled back into her hat, she looked like a high school kid, even at 25. After a long, delighted exhale, she jumped up, pulled him to her by his jacket, and gave him a deep kiss. We did it. Charlie, did you love it? Can you believe it? Is there anything as beautiful as the in-migration of the sandhill cranes? It was incredible, just as you said. He wrapped his arms around her in a bear hug and felt her warmth before plunging ahead before he lost his nerve. But to me, beauty is you now in your element, and love is what we have together and will have forever. As he spoke, he lowered her to a seated position on the bench and went down on one knee. Caroline Lee Tate, would you share your life with me and be my wife? His words tapered to a whisper as Caroline started to laugh. Charlie, you silly man, what are you doing? She took his face in her hands and gave him a quick kiss. He knew Caroline well enough not to expect a conventional response to a proposal of marriage. So he held his position on one knee and deftly pulled a little box from his jacket pocket, trying to hide his terror that she would persist in thinking this a joke. Caroline eyed the box. Oh, Charlie, you know marriage isn't my thing. I don't think you'd be happy with me. I'm made for the life of a nomad, a mad scientist wandering the world and discovering its secrets, not playing housewife. Caroline, I don't want a housewife. I want you. I want you as you are, wanderer, inquisitive explorer. We were meant to be together. Don't you feel that? Caroline bounced up and walked around the blind, pausing to pick up her binoculars and check out a few straggling cranes. Charlie gave her a few minutes. Then he approached her body from behind and put his chin on her shoulder, waiting for her body to relax as he put his arms around her and rocked her from side to side. Caroline, Charlie, you know feelings are hard for me, but I do feel good when you're around. She lowered the binoculars and turned to him. You're serious? I am serious. I want you as you are. I promise I love you. He took both of her hands and met her gaze. His heart raced. Finally, Caroline whispered, then yes, Charlie, as long as you promise, I will marry you. Charlie sealed the deal with a passionate kiss, hoping he left her wanting more, and ushered Caroline into their Jeep rental. The celebratory dinner and night of lovemaking boosted his confidence that he could successfully compete for her attentions. So that kind of gets you into the story, and it's kind of an odd proposal, a scene. You can see a little bit the different personalities there, and you kind of wonder, oh, I wonder how this is going to go. So, but I think it does kind of hook you to want to read a little bit more. So I'm going to pause and just ask for questions from the audience. Have people read it? No? Oh my goodness. Okay, well then I'm glad I read that part, because you're hooked now, right? Are there any questions from the Zoom audience at this point? Not yet. Okay. Well, I can keep dribbling on. All right. Oh, there's a question from the audience. Yes. I guess I'm curious what inspired. Oh, and that was exactly what I was going to cover. And that was the second question. Okay, these are kinds of the kind of questions you get in a live event. So thank you for both of them. The inspiration is twofold. What was already mentioned in the introduction is that I do have a lake place on Lake Superior. I'm bewitched by the lake and I love it. And I spend a lot of time there. And I find its drama, it's changing everything all the time is just music for me. And so I really was looking for something to tip. I wanted to find a story so that I could tip my hat at the lake. And given the drama, I knew I needed a very dramatic story, or at least in my mind. So I then remembered a class that I had taken at one point about unreliable narrators. I'm sure it was a class at the Loft. I've taken a lot of my classes there. And, you think about unreliable narrators and you think of children, you think of somebody with a mental illness or, suspected murderers, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't really want to go in any of those directions. So I decided that I would create a character that was totally perplexing. And what do I say about her? So I settled on a unique, bold character who lacked even a hint of self-awareness, a character who defied convention and was extremely difficult to categorize, a character who, when displayed on the page, would be untraditional at best and unreliable at worst. So Finding Grace is the story of this character's effect on others. So now you've seen a little bit about Caroline in the first chapter. And so I was inspired to do a character that we've all met people that lack insight. We've all met people who are very difficult. You will find Caroline to be both. So that's how I was inspired. Now, how long did it take me to write this book? My first book came out in 2019. It's called A Better Next, and it's women's fiction, domestic fiction. It's about somebody starting over later in life. And so after that one came out, it came out in May of 2019. And as you remember, the pandemic then was the following year. And so I was able to do a fair number of events live, which I really appreciated. And then things kind of changed. So I wrote it during that time. I had started it with a storyline, but I was able to really do a fair amount of writing during the pandemic. Because, you know, as many of us were, we were spending a lot of time at home. So, but the story that I started writing then, which would have been somewhere in 2020, is totally not the story that I ended up with in the book. You know, there's a lot of iterations. I meandered a lot. And, you know, when you work with an editor, they suggest things. So there's a fair number of changes that I've made along the way. So, all right, did that bring up any other questions? Yes. Was that a question? Oh, so we've got a twofer here, right? Yes. So we've gotten a twofer question, one from the live audience as well as one from our Zoom audience about why in the world ornithology and am I a birder? Again, I was inspired by my time at the lake, and you can't help but be up there without going to Hawk Ridge on occasion. And I've got close friends that are really serious birders, so I know the life. And people who keep their world lists and go off somewhere and come back and you know, wait until they've got enough money to take the next trip, et cetera, but all on the volunteers. I mean, these are passionate hobbyists. I don't know any ornithologists that are actually in the business of teaching ornithology, which is what Caroline does at UMD, actually, fictitiously. But I knew enough to, and I did need to do some research there. There's probably two areas in the story that I really needed to do some deeper research. One was the ornithology. I didn't want to come across as just somebody that was throwing that in without having some depth to it. And in fact, there's a part of the book where Caroline, in her travels, becomes very interested in conservation. And so I did some research on that, and of course the species and what's happening with bird population. So that's in the book a little bit, but you know, I don't have deep knowledge, no. Any other questions live or on Zoom? We've got, is writing an encore career for you? Oh, well, probably it's pretty obvious that if I only wrote my first book in 2019 and my hair is totally white, that yes, it is an encore career for me. I had a very busy career and a burnout career, you might say. So I was fortunate enough to be able to walk away and be able to retire fairly early, and didn't know what I wanted to do, if anything. And the advice I always give people when they retire, if they've got the opportunity, is to rest, breathe, try to figure out who you are now. And I was so into a busy life that I really needed to find out who I was. And I have been an avid reader forever. And so it was pretty clear to me that I wanted to, but I never aspired to be a writer. I was just a reader, but I had no idea how they did what they did. Authors. I didn't know an author personally when I was growing up. And so that kind of just piqued my interest in wanting to know how they do it. And so I went down to the loft and took many classes. And what happens for those of you that may be in education or have ever been a student, you know that the way you learn is to do. You don't just get to sit there like a lump. So eventually they had me writing things, and I would write little islands, which is, you know, if you put islands together, perhaps they make a scene, and scenes together might make a chapter. And so it was just baby steps, but I kind of got the bug. And there were several people that I befriended, and you know, you have a cohort of people that are taking the same classes. And eventually, I had been hanging around the loft long enough, so I was able to have a work in progress that was at a point, and this was a Better Next, totally not titled or anything like that, but the loft has a program where they bring in agents for prospective writers, you know, and the agents, I think I had 5 that were there for me to query, and they give you feedback on your work. And it's a pretty serious endeavor. You have to learn how to capsulize what your book is about and put it in a 1 to 2 minute, you know, elevator speech is the way I would look at that, and deliver it to somebody in that period of time. And then you wait to find out if they're interested in it enough to send, if they ask you to send something to them, that's a good thing. They can ask you for, you know, the first chapter, they can ask you for the first 50 pages, they can ask you for the whole thing if you're really lucky. And so I did that, and I did get, you know, some interest of the 5. I think there was only 4 of them that were actually interested in any, were in my genre. But it was a very good experience, and it kind of like before that and after that are 2 different parts of my writing life, because then I had to decide, well, am I going to do this or not? And so for about 6 months, I played with the notion of trying to find an agent. And that is really complicated because, you know, you have to find an agent who's interested in the kind of writing you do. And then you have to, you're trying to find an agent that can actually has an experience record of selling the book to a publisher, but you're talking a lot of time. And I wasn't getting any younger, and I wasn't really, that part wasn't very satisfying to me. I've been in business for my entire life. I knew what that was. And so I really wanted to write. So I found a hybrid publisher who is still juried, so they don't take every manuscript that's sent to them, but they're also willing to work with you on all the steps that you'd get from a big publisher. But you put some money down and they put some money down, and then you share with the reward. So there's a lot, it's a little bit different than indie publishing, which is totally on your own and you just buy the services. With a hybrid publisher, they actually have them all laid out. And one of the things that I'm really pleased about is that there's so many really good authors with She Writes Press, a lot of award-winning authors. And one of the things that we get praise about all the time is the covers. And I happen to think it's a lovely cover. And, you know, don't believe what they say about covers don't sell books. Covers sell books. You have to pick it up and look and see what's on the back. Now, this one, it certainly didn't hurt me that I had both Alan Eskins and, and William Kent Kruger blurb it. So they liked the book, which has helped a lot. Well, how did that happen? Well, you know, I'm not a shrinking violet. And I actually met them both in very interesting ways. Kent, you know, doesn't live very far from here. He's living in Como Park. And at one point, this is now a closed, this is closed, but there was a little Winding Tree bookstore was it Winding Tree? No, Winding Trail. Yes. Winding Trail. And he was doing a book signing. And so I was just standing in line waiting for him to sign my book. And I decided I would ask him. And he was so charming and so kind. And of course, I didn't have it ready. And so he gave me his information and said, yeah, when you're ready, let me know. And he kind of looked at me like, who knew? So I kept the information, and he was good to his word. And then he liked it. And I think, who knows? I think it was a very good blurb. It was a good blurb for me. And I think it was a good blurb for a lot of people. It seemed to be generous. He liked it. So Alan Eskens was published a book the same year that A Better Next came out. And we were both at a rain taxi event at the State Fairgrounds. And we were at what they call the Minnesota Mingle, which is just a little stand around, get to know each other. And we were chatting. And he was, again, very charming and generous, and knew that it was my first book, and suggested that, I should do X and Y and Z. And he also told me that, I can't remember how many books he had out by then, but he's a criminal attorney, and he had been practicing, but he was very close to being able to not practice anymore. So he was going to be making his living writing books. And so again, he remembered me when I reached out to him, and was in fact, he did it. I was doing this during the pandemic, and you don't get an advanced reader copy, which is what this is. This is not the final product, until just a few months before your book is published. And so Alan Eskens was willing to let me take it to Office Depot and get it copied and send it that way to him. So, I mean, really. Now, Kent did get an advanced reader copy, which I was happy to send to him. But both of those gentlemen are, and I've seen them at several events now, and I consider them to be colleagues in writing. How about that? So that's how that happened. Yeah, of course. Okay. Yep.
What is your writing process?
Oh. Okay, so I am, what do they call these, pantsers or whatever? In fact, I think I brought it. This is my outline for Finding Grace. Can I show this? It's ridiculously complicated. But for each scene, not each chapter, there is an entire graph of information that you put together. And I was taught this by, I thought, a very smart woman who, this is what she did, and she's a coach. And I realized that not only does that help you make sure that you're getting all the right stuff in each chapter, but if you are a writer like I am, and even when I was writing my 3 books, I'm not writing right this second, but I would not necessarily write every day. If you don't write every day, you kind of lose track. It happens to everybody. And so having something like this, and of course it's online. I mean, I'm just copying it just for posterity's sake. You can kind of pick up your threads again. So that is kind of an outline process. So I'm not just one of those people that can sit down and just write. I do need to have a structure. However, I am what we would call a character. I follow the characters. I first create the characters, and then I let them show me what they want to do. And if things get too tame, I throw in a grenade. And so I don't think of the plot points necessarily so much as if you've developed the character the way I like to, then they will tell you the story. So that's the way I write. Does that answer that one? Okay, good. but again, I don't write every day. I use an outline. Writing groups also was a question, I think, online. I have had many writing groups. I have been in the same book club for, I think we just celebrated like our 40th anniversary. Really, really. And so they have been supportive, but they haven't all been my beta readers. They just know that I was writing and have certainly supported me going through it. But I've also had, the loft. Remember, I talked about a cohort of people. I've also done a fair number of classes online. And so you still have, again, colleagues that are writing. And now with She Writes Press, I have what I call sister authors. And we, depending upon, now I've got a book coming out in November of 2023. And there's a cohort of people that I'll be talking with about our progress. And right now I Zoom every other week with the group of people that published in the spring of 2022. And even though Finding Grace came out in July, I was still considered a spring author. So that's been very helpful, and not just for the writing itself, so much as how are you promoting it? What kind of events are you having? What are you putting online? What is this blog thing that you're doing? So I find that to be really helpful, because writing is a lonely thing. It can be very isolating. You're sitting in a room with your characters and you're trying to figure out what they're going to do next, or they should be telling you what they're going to do next. So it's very helpful to surround yourself with people that can support you. So I've enjoyed it immensely. It's been a very good second chapter for me. Yes.
So I have read your book.
Okay.
Just by the first chapter that you read, it sounds like you are exploring the new structure of the family. Is that a theme that kind of comes through, or is that just a function of the
I think I'm going to let you be the judge of that after you read it. I would say that there's a lot of themes being explored. I think that, Caroline and Charlie were both orphans. Is that a common enough element for both of them to want the same thing in a family? One of them grew up in foster care. So neither of them really had, and Caroline was raised by an elderly uncle. So neither of them had what I would refer to as a conventional nuclear family. And so they didn't have that model. And they, Charlie is a biology teacher. And he was attracted to her total involvement in her birds. She was like a one-track mind. So is that a new, mode of relating? I don't know. But one of the messages that I tried to get across is, parenting is a big deal. And you don't just on a whim decide you're going to parent, especially in an age of choice. You need to decide how it's going to work. And there was never an explicit conversation between the two of them. So there's not so whether that's a new kind of family or just a dysfunctional family, I think is kind of what you should look at when you're reading the book. The other, I want to get back to the research. We talked a little bit about the bird part, but the other thing was, I touch on mental health, and I steer clear of labels, and I do that partly because I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, and I wanted the characters to be more accessible to people than to label them. There's clearly mental health anguish. There is some narcissism. There is some neglect, parental neglect. There's also some role redefinition of what is a mother? What does it mean to be a mother? If you don't want children and you have them, what does that then require? And when your hubby says, I'll take care of it, honey, what does that mean? And can he really even know what that means? So all of those things are explored. But yes, family is called into question quite a bit. Good question. Oh, yes. Is it a continuing story? No. You know, it's interesting. Remember, this is my second chapter, and I wanted to get to know who I was, and I'm basically exploring. So I had purposefully, after the first book came out, and there's an interesting main character, and people were saying, well, are you going to write more about Jess? And I said, no. I'm tired of Jess. You can decide what you think Jess will do next. And then I came up with book number 2, and it begs for perhaps a sequel. I'm not going to do that. Pardon me? Not yet. Anyway, yeah, you know, time will tell. But the third book, I've taken a turn. Both of these have been, we would call them fiction, contemporary fiction. The third book is a psychological thriller. Where did that come from? I don't really know. In fact, it didn't start out as that. But again, I followed my characters, and it takes place in biotech. And it's very much a corporate intrigue story. There's, you know, villains and heroes, and so it has nothing to do with either of the 2 previous books. So, and I don't know what that means relative to whether people will continue to follow an author because they like the way that person writes, or because they have the same continuing characters. I don't know. I don't know. I just needed to be true to myself when I'm writing. Well, and you know, who knows? I mean, I don't have anything in progress right now. Now I'm, you know, in the promotion phase for Finding Grace, and I'll be starting to really pay attention to the production cycle of book number 3, which will take a lot of time. And, you know, that means, and I still keep promoting the first book. So I've got 3 books, and I don't have a lot of people helping me do any of that. So it's me. So, and, you know, life happens. I've got grandkids, you know. About how I didn't want to wait around and look for an agent. I've done a lot of pitching in my life, selling services, you know, interviewing people for certain things, managing things. Okay, can you hear me? Is this working? No, not so much? Oh, here you go. There we go. Okay, that question. Okay, so the question was there characteristics or traits or talents that I had from my business career that were applicable to my writing career? And I think I got to the point of saying that, you know, that whole part of looking for an agent and spending time doing that whole thing was just something I wasn't going to be patient with. So, because I've done all of that in my previous life, where I had to find, you know, a place for my business to get in. So I just wasn't willing to do that. But I would say the strategic part, I've always been a strategic thinker. I think big, and I used that when I was writing my first book, because it was all about mergers and acquisitions and what the cost of that can be on a family. So that I would say was a direct link. I think the other thing is just life experience and knowing that, you know, what is it? The fellow that writes the books about, I can't remember his name, but the fellow that wrote the book about how long it takes you to learn a new skill, like, what is it, 10,000 hours or some crazy thing? Gladwell, Malcolm Gladwell. Thank you for that. And so, you know, what is that, 5 years or something like that? You know, it takes a while to learn a new skill. And so I wasn't too hard on myself, because I know that, you know, you're not going to get good at something unless you try it and practice it. And so taking feedback and using that was something that I've done throughout my whole career. So I think that was a direct help in my writing career. I think I don't have, let's put it this way, my ego involvement is more personal in this career than it was in the first one, because this one is all about me. These characters come from me. Whereas in the first career, you know, it was all about my team. And clearly I was the leader, but, you know, it's a little bit of a different thing. It's a professional thing. So I think those would be the takeaways for that question. Does that work? Is there a last question? Am I at the point where we should be asking the last question? Okay. Is there a last question from the audience? Everybody's worried that, you know, the last question is so important. See. Oh, you've got one. All right. Go for it, Richmond. Yes.
I'm curious how you feel about the categories or labels, domestic fiction and women's fiction.
Yeah. That's it. So the question was, what do I feel about the labels of any of the ways your book is categorized? And I don't particularly like it. I've got a close friend who happens to be a professor at Penn, who read my book while he was on the Jersey Shore with his kids and had his wife take the picture. He's in his mid-50s, and he let me put it on Instagram, merely because he likes that kind of book. And so I think when people see women's fiction, what in the world does that mean? I prefer contemporary fiction. I'm not a historical fiction writer. So that has to be clarified. But, you know, coming of age fits for this particular book. But I think I just saw one of the big time agents that has a lot of traction in the field saying that they should retire the term women's fiction, because it's so, I don't know, narrow, I think. You know, I would say this book is about families. Charlie is the main narrator, but why would they call it women's fiction then? Because I'm a woman? You know, I mean, I just don't quite get that. But, you know, the author doesn't really have a choice in how it's categorized. And She Writes Press is lucky enough to have the same distributor as most other books, Ingram publishing services. And that's why we get into all the bookstores, et cetera, et cetera. It was one of the things that I needed if I was going to go that route. So, you know, it's legitimate, it's genuine, and it's very professional. So, but they need to know what it's about in order to have the sales force sell to those stores. So you can see how that's entrenched. And of course, you know, a lot of books are bought on Amazon, and you can go on Amazon and look at my book. And right now, I just get a kick out of this, because when I go to look for Finding Grace, it is compared to the books that are bought with it are Where the Crawdads Sing, which I think is pretty good. I'd like to be in that company. And then because it's, again, you've got that lonely girl growing up kind of like an orphan. Well, she was an orphan, and then parents left her, et cetera, et cetera. And she went through a lot of trials and tribulations. So it fits. And then the other book that they're comparing it to is Colleen Hoover, who wrote Verity. And I thought, oh, well, you know, I kind of thought of her as kind of a flash in the pan, because she's kind of a new author, and she's so like just immense numbers of books. But I consider, somehow I had her in my head as kind of a millennial. That's who she would attract for readers. Well, this same guy that sat on the beach and read my book, when I saw him at a meeting a couple weeks ago, he said, you know, you should read Colleen Hoover. And so I've got her on my Kindle now, because I want to see what Verity is all about. And you know, I'm trying to think. I don't know if she's categorized as women's fiction or what kind of fiction. So I think we should get rid of it, but I understand where it comes from. So I will, as with my name, I will answer to any pronunciation of my name, and I will answer to anybody categorizing my book how they think it should be categorized, right? As long as they read it. Oh.
I just have a couple closing remarks.
Okay, there you go. I think you need that.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your attention and participation and questions. Thank you to Maren for the conversation, and the Hamline Midway Library for hosting. If you would like to purchase a book, see Maren and Wendy in the back of the room. And we hope to see you next week with Antonia Angrist. I apologize for any mispronunciation. And her novel, Sirens and Muses. Thank you for coming out tonight. Welcome back.